Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Curt universal wiring system for towed vehicles. Now this system is going to be great for when you're flat towing your vehicle to send the signal from your motor coach to the vehicle. Now this system is going to wire into your taillights and going to send the signal to the front of the vehicle, and that way when you hook up to your umbilical on your motor coach, when you turn your turn signals on or use your brake lights or your running lights, it's going to mimic that on your vehicle. And that's going to allow the people behind you to know what you're actually doing, whether if you're changing lanes or slowing down, and that's going to keep you safe and legal. Now other towed vehicles you might have seen have the magnetic lights attached to them. Well, with those you have to run the power up to the vehicle. So not only do you have wire running down the highway and kind of flapping along, but also that's one more component that you have to keep track of and make sure that you have ready to go when you're going to flat tow. Having it installed on the vehicle gives it a nice OEM look. You don't have to worry about those magnetic lights falling off, and it just looks a lot cleaner. Installation is pretty straightforward, and once you have it done, you theoretically shouldn't have to worry about any other lighting. You'll be ready to go and use your diode wiring and turn signals whenever you need to when flat towing. Now with some of the newer vehicles that have LED taillights, you do have to do a little bit of splicing into the wire, but it's pretty basic and pretty easy to do, especially because I'm going to be walking you through it and we'll get these working properly on your vehicle. So let's take a look at that. To begin, we're going to remove our rear taillights, and that's going to gain us access to the vehicle's taillight wiring, and that way we can get these all hooked up. So with an 8mm socket, I'm going to go ahead and remove these. There's just 2 screws on each taillight. When it comes to popping the taillight out, it's pretty simple. You may want a plastic trim removal tool for a little bit of leverage. There are some pins that it pops into, but I found that kind of giving it a quick bump on this back end here will kind of loosen that up. And it is kind of scary sounding, but with the trim panel removal tool, you can actually kind of use this as leverage to kind of pry this back. And again, it's going to take a little force. There is that clip on this back end here that it pops into. And then with this popped out, you can see here's our harness here, and we're going to be needing to splice into these wires. So we'll go ahead and unplug this here. And we'll set our taillight in the bed just to keep it safe. We're going to go ahead and do that same process on the other side. So now we need to route our wires, and that way we can tie into our harness here. And so I like to take the actual whole bundle and kind of lay it out. So here we have our 4 wires with the 4-pole. This is going to be running up to the front of the vehicle. So that's going to go there. We have a ground which will be attaching. And then you have these. Now your yellow and red and brown, this is going to go to the left side of the vehicle or the driver's side. Our green, red, and brown is going to go to the passenger side. We also have this spare plug here, and this is only if you plan on using a trailer with your flat tow vehicle as well. So the way we need to get this routed though is simply going to be running this up through this little gap in here. So to get these wires up, the best way that we've found, we have a spare airline tube, and if you don't have any spare tube at home, that's okay. You can use a wire, a coat hanger, something along those lines to just get this routed down. We're just going to kind of use that to pull it up. So I'll go ahead and feed this down. So with that routed through, I'm going to take some electrical tape and I'm going to take my wires and try to keep them as tightly bundled as possible. It's going to make it a little bit easier to feed that through. And so with just a little bit of electrical tape around them, it's going to make it easy to get these routed up. I'm just going to kind of put these on the connectors. Try not to get our handy dandy tags that they have there for us. And on the truck, this is actually a little bit easier than some vehicles to route this up. So it's not too hard to do. You can actually see these kind of feeding up here. But now that we have these, we can go ahead and do that on the other side as well. And that way we have both of our taillights at least wired and get ready to connect them up. So now we've we have our wire routed up to our other side, and while I took that wire over, I tried to tuck it in spots where it's not going to get in the way of the spare tire, so I kind of tucked it up where the rear hitch is. So if you want to do that and throw a few zip ties on there to keep it in place, that's going to be ideal. Now here we have our wire loom, and as you can see, this one has had some previous wire done, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull all this off, and that way I can access the wires that we're actually going to be tying into with our butt connectors here. So go ahead and make some small clips, and since this one has already been kind of taped up, yours may probably have some tape as well, but just kind of peel that back, and you're going to want to gain access to a spot that it's still going to have play to plug into the taillight and still be able to tuck down in there. So I'm going to kind of shoot for this area. So if I can open this up, that's where we're going to go. Now if you are using a razor blade or some snips, just obviously be careful not to damage any of your previous wiring. There we go. And so here it looks like this is the factory wrapped edge here, so I'm going to trim this back a little bit more, get this tape off, and get some room to play with these wires. So this is where it can kind of get a little bit tricky, but I've gone through and found the proper way to get this wired. So you're going to see we have a total of 6 wires here. This one, the left turn input and output, we're actually not going to be using these, and the reason being is these taillights are a 2-wire, meaning your brake light and your turn signal are all integrated into one, and the other one's going to be our running light. So the yellow here, since we're not going to be using it, I'm simply going to tape these up and we can get those out of the way. Now for our other wires, it's hard to test with an electrical probe because the LED taillights don't really allow you to do that without poking through some wires. So I've gone through and found the wiring information we need. And so I've separated, we have a orange and gray wire, and that's going to be our stop and turn. And then our blue and gray is going to be our parking light, or as you may know it, the running light. So those are going to be the ones that we splice into, and it's going to be pretty easy to do here. We're simply going to cut these. You're going to want to splice both ends because the butt connectors from our harness are going to tie into those. So now that we have these kind of separated out, next thing we need to do is check our tabs here. So like I said before, our blue-gray is going to be the parking, which taillight input, and our other one's going to be the brake/turn. So our red ones here, we're going to be tying in to our gray and orange. Now you can see output to module, and what that means is it's going to our tail light. So as we can see, this one's closer to the clip, so we can attach this. Now always kind of go through and pull your wires just like that to make sure that you have a solid connection. Now our other side that says from the vehicle is going to attach to the other. Now moving along, we have our brown ones here, same thing, to module, we're going to attach to the one closer to the clip. And then from vehicle, go to the other end. As you can see here, I've changed out the butt connectors. The ones that were supplied with the factory, I wasn't too happy with the connections, and I've opted for a heat shrink style, and that way it really cinches it up, keeps it waterproof, and that way you don't really have to worry about the elements causing any corrosion or buildup in there. So I'm going to heat shrink these down, and then I'm going to kind of get these all nice and clean and ready to put the taillight back on. So our passenger side is going to be a little bit different just as the color of the wires have changed. So the ones that we're not going to use on this are going to be the green ones. So we can actually go ahead and tape these back. Now as far as our vehicle harness, the wires have changed a little bit as well. Now our blue and gray has stayed the same, but you're going to see we have a green and orange wire, and we're going to be tying into that. And that, it's easy to kind of denote which ones we're using because these are thicker gauge than the rest of the wires. So that should help just to kind of give you another go, no-go gauge as to make sure you're doing the right one. So same process, we're going to simply cut these. And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to change my connectors out here with heat shrink ones. Again, not completely necessary, but it gives me a little bit more peace of mind and makes it to where you shouldn't have to ever go back because of a loose connection. So now I've buttoned this up with just a little extra wire loom and some tape just to kind of make it clean. But you're going to want to kind of tuck these back in here. That way it's not going to get in the way of the tailgate assist here. And simply plug your taillight back in. And then when you're feeding this in, you have this pin. You're going to want to put that in there first. You also have a bottom pin, so get those kind of lined in there. And again, if your loom kind of gets in the way, you may have to tuck it in, just as mine is. But once that's tucked in, it should slip into place, just as it did from the factory. So now we have our screw holes lined up. We'll go ahead, put our hardware back in. Now go ahead and repeat this process on the other taillight. Then after that, we're going to head under the vehicle and kind of get the rest of the wiring going. So now we have our ground wire here, and we're simply going to find a point on the chassis that we can ground this to. Now your ring terminal does have a flat side, so that's going to need to go against the metal. And we're going to take our self-tapping screw that was included in the kit and just find a good spot for it. I think right here should do just fine. Now with your self-tappers, don't go too crazy as you can actually ruin the threads, so just go enough to where that wire's not able to move. Perfect. So all we have left is these 4 wires. Now this is going to run to the front of the vehicle, and my goal when running the wire is to stay away from anything that can be hot or moving. So that's going to be your exhaust, your axles, your drive shafts, and a lot of times you can actually follow the factory wire loom to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and run this wire, and then I'll show you how I did it. So I've routed our wiring up to the front of the vehicle, and the way that I did it, I tried my best to keep it out of sight, but also out of the harm of anything moving or hot, and really trying to use some factory spots. So you're going to want a lot of zip ties, and it's really up to you how you run it. There's no perfect way to do it, but I found that the way that I've run seemed to work out pretty well. So I'll show you how we ran it. From this back here, I simply went on this frame rail, and at the gas tank, kind of cut over here using this center support. And coming out to the outside here, I actually zip tied it up on the top of the frame, and that's going to keep this out of weather, and also nothing should catch it on the road and cause any damage to it. So it stays protected up here, and then you can see it start to poke out. And from here I went on the side. Now this part, it got a little tricky because you do have an axle here, you also have your steering, so I used the existing lines and zip tied those. And then kind of tapers over this front cross member. And then I brought it up over to where our wire exists up here. Now this is going to attach eventually to our mount up front. So we have our wiring running to the front here, and now we attach this to a 6-pole. We've also added a charge line, and what that's going to do is keep the battery charged while flat towing this, so that way when you get to your destination and you want to use your vehicle, you don't have to jump it, and then you're ready to start and go. So on the back side here, we have all of our wires put in place based on the diagrams from the manufacturer. And this is our auxiliary charge line here, and that just is a simple run to a amp circuit, and that's going to allow that power from the RV to actually run power and feed this and keep our battery charged while flat towing. So since we have these all hooked up, we're going to want to test this to make sure that it's working. So with our jump box, we're going to hook this up. And so now we're going to run through the light cycles to make sure that it's all working. So we're going to start with our running lights. Next, I'm going to do my left turn signal. Then my brake lights. And then my right turn signal. Now before putting our boot on and calling it good here, you're going to want to go through with a little bit of black silicone, and what that's going to do is prevent any corrosion and basically give this a much longer lifespan and keep it nice and protected. So covering these up completely is going to make sure that you don't have any water getting in there to that raw wire and causing any breakdown. And then from there we can put our cap on. With that all coated up, we can now put our boot in place, and it's going to stay protected from the elements. Now as far as mounting your plug goes, it's kind of up to you. I've gone ahead and used this cap here, and I think that's going to give it a nice look. So, and it's also going to kind of keep it a little bit OEM looking and not sticking out too much. So it's up to you. Now, once you have it in a spot that you like, you're going to go ahead and drill, keep that in place. And also, you might want to put a little dielectric grease in here, and that's going to make sure that you have good connections to your umbilical. And that was a look at the Curt Universal Diode Wiring Kit for towed vehicles on a 2020 Ford F-150. Thanks for watching.